Hey guys, today we are going to do something a little different. You are not galloping across battlefields, or chasing treasure maps, or even debating whether aliens built the pyramids. No, you are simply waking up with Abraham Lincoln, not the grand marble statue you know from Washington, D.C., not the face on the penny that jingles in your pocket, but the actual man still half asleep, fumbling with his clothes in the dim candlelight of a morning in the 1860s. The rooster outside has no pity. The White House servants are already shuffling around, and you somehow are along for the ride. And I'll warn you, if you had to keep up with Lincoln's daily schedule, you probably wouldn't survive a week. It's not because it's so glamorous, far from it. It's because it is so relentlessly ordinary, so long, so packed with other people's problems, and so crushingly lacking in naps. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a quick comment with your location and your local time. I love seeing people listening from across the world, whether you're in Nebraska at 3 a.m. or in Tokyo pretending it's bedtime when it's not. Now you rub your eyes and notice how cold the room feels. Central heating isn't really a thing in 1861. Lincoln gets out of bed slowly, every limb protesting, and pads across the floorboards. The wooden floor groans, reminding you this old house has seen more history than you have socks. A servant carries in water in a pitcher, and Lincoln splashes his face awake. No hot shower, no minty toothpaste, no quick scroll through Instagram, just icy water and a moment to mutter something about how the day is already too long. You notice the furniture looks bare. Lincoln's White House wasn't exactly the polished, tourist-ready version you know today. Historians point out that the place was shabby, drafty, and at times smelled like wet wallpaper. Lincoln himself often joked about it, saying, "The place was more a boarding house with high rent than a palace." And here you are, standing in the middle of it, realizing that even the leader of a fractured nation starts his morning with the same universal complaint: too early. Mainstream historical fact. Lincoln was famously an early riser, usually awake at dawn. His day often began before most of Washington had even rubbed the sleep from their eyes. He believed mornings were the best time to read and write his mind sharper before the flood of visitors arrived. Quirky tidbit. Despite his towering frame and iconic beard, Lincoln wasn't fussy about clothes. He often wore rumpled suits, sometimes mismatched, and was known to leave his socks inside out. You watch him now, pulling on his trousers, with all the enthusiasm of a teenager headed to gym class. There is no staff carefully laying out wardrobe changes like you might imagine for a president. It's more like, here's the least wrinkled black coat, and hope nobody notices the tear at the elbow. Historians still argue whether Lincoln was genuinely indifferent to appearances, or if his messy look was partly deliberate, a way to project honesty and humility to ordinary Americans. Either way, in this quiet, half-lit room, he just looks like a man too busy to care whether his shirt collar points the right way. The candle sputters as you both shuffle toward the desk. Lincoln sits, stretching his long legs awkwardly under the table, and takes a moment to stare at the shadows dancing on the wall. He is already thinking, always thinking. You lean over and see papers stacked like little mountains. Some are speeches in progress, some are letters from strangers begging for favors, and others are reports from generals who can't agree on anything. It's all waiting for him before the sun has even peeked over the horizon. And here comes the first joke of the day. Lincoln mutters, "Well, this ought to last me until breakfast," glancing at the pile as if it might eat him. You realize sarcasm is one of his survival tools. Without it, the sheer weight of decision-making might crush him before noon. The air is chilly, but Lincoln doesn't seem to mind. He dips his pen into ink and scratches out a line or two, pauses, scratches his beard, and then crosses it out again. The sound of nib on paper is oddly soothing, like the slow ticking of a clock. For you, This is already starting to feel like the world's longest meditation session. You glance out the window. The city of Washington is still waking up, horses clopping on cobblestones, vendors hauling barrels, the faint sound of church bells. It's easy to forget this is the capital of a country tearing itself apart in civil war. Right now, it's just a sleepy town with too many muddy streets and not enough decent coffee. Lincoln finally pushes back from the desk, stretching his joints, cracking like old furniture. He looks around the dim room, then at you, as if silently admitting, "Another day, here we go again." The candlelight makes his face look older than his years. He's only in his early 50s, but the lines already carve deep. You realize you're not watching a legend. You're watching a man about to put one foot in front of the other, starting with breakfast. And just like that, you trudge along behind him, your eyelids heavy, already realizing this is only the very first hour of a very long day. You shuffle after Lincoln down the hallway, past portraits that stare back, as though judging both of you for being awake this early. The White House is still quiet. Though not silent somewhere, you hear the faint clatter of dishes, the clink of iron pans, the low murmur of servants moving with practiced rhythm. Your stomach grumbles in sympathy, but you quickly realize you shouldn't expect a feast. This is not a modern brunch spread with avocado toast and oat milk lattes. Lincoln's breakfasts are plain, bordering on bleak, and yet he seems content with them. The dining room greets you with cold air and even colder decor. The wallpaper peels a little, the chairs look like they've been borrowed from a thrift shop, and the table itself seems to sag under the weight of history rather than food. Lincoln takes his seat slowly, as if the chair might creak in protest. Across from him, you notice a plate eggs, sometimes fried, sometimes boiled, a bit of cornbread that looks like it's been sitting out since yesterday, and a cup of coffee so black it could double as ink. Mainstream historical fact. Lincoln's breakfasts were famously simple. He often ate just an egg toast or cornbread and coffee, nothing fancy, nothing indulgent. He had little interest in food, treating meals more as interruptions than pleasures. Quirky tidbit stories suggest Lincoln sometimes forgot to eat altogether, losing track of time while reading or working. Mary Todd Lincoln, his wife, occasionally had to remind him, almost like a mother prodding a distracted child. As you sit there, you half expect her to swoop in, hands on hips, demanding he finish his plate. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's plain eating habits were a matter of personal taste or a conscious effort to project humility. Some believe he was genuinely indifferent to flavors, while others suspect he liked appearing frugal to contrast with European monarchs who dined like kings. Lincoln takes a sip of the coffee, grimaces, and mutters, "Strong enough to float a horseshoe." You wonder if that's a compliment or a complaint. Either way, he drinks it. You meanwhile hesitate before nibbling the cornbread, which crumbles in your fingers and tastes suspiciously like chalk disguised as food. There's a pause in the room, the kind of silence that feels both heavy and calming. Lincoln sits with shoulders hunched, lost in thought, even as he chews. His mind is already drifting to the mail piled on his desk, to the cabinet meeting waiting later, to the war bleeding across the nation. But here, for just a moment, he seems almost ordinary, like a neighbor catching breakfast before heading to work at the courthouse. The candlelight from earlier has been replaced by weak daylight creeping through the windows. The morning sun struggles against the fog, washing everything in a dull gray. You find yourself staring at Lincoln's face in this new light. Tired eyes, deep lines, but also a flicker of calm. He doesn't rush, but he doesn't linger either. He eats because he must not, because he cares. A light joke slips from him as he eyes the cornbread. This'll put iron in your backbone or break your teeth. You chuckle softly, then remember you're supposed to be dignified in front of a president. Still, he doesn't mind. He likes humor even at breakfast. For you, the slow pace of this meal is like watching paint dry in real time. But that's the point. You lean back in the creaky chair, listening to the faint scrape of his fork, the ticking clock on the mantel, the occasional sigh that seems to say, "How much longer must these mornings go on?" And then, almost abruptly, he's done. He sets down the fork, pushes the plate away, as if to declare victory over breakfast, and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. No napkin flourish, no royal manners. Just a man who has eaten enough to keep going until noon. You notice, though, he leaves behind a crust of bread untouched. You wonder forgetfulness or indifference. The servants will clear it without question, but the mystery remains. Lincoln pushes back his chair and stands. His frame seems to stretch toward the ceiling, tall enough to make you feel like a child again. He adjusts his coat pats down his hair that refuses to stay put, and without much ceremony, moves toward the door. Breakfast is over, and the serious part of the day is about to begin. You trail after him, yawning, realizing you're already tired. If this is what a presidential breakfast feels like, quiet, plain, and just a little bit depressing, you might not survive the rest of the schedule. You step back into the hallway with Lincoln, your footsteps echoing faintly across the wooden floors. The air smells faintly of ink and dust now, rather than eggs and coffee, because Lincoln is already drifting toward his desk. Breakfast is finished, and now the real flood begins, the morning mail. You wonder how many people in the 1860s thought, "I'll just write a quick note to the president, he'll have time to read it." The answer, far too many. When you reach his study, the desk you glimpsed earlier has somehow doubled in paperwork. Stacks of letters lean precariously, sealed envelopes spill out of wooden trays, and messengers keep dropping off more like determined pigeons. Lincoln sits, sighs deeply, and breaks the first seal. The scraping of wax feels like the starter pistol of an exhausting marathon. Mainstream historical fact. Lincoln received enormous volumes of correspondence daily, hundreds of letters each week. They came from generals, governors, businessmen, foreign diplomats, and most touchingly, ordinary citizens. Some offered advice on the war, some pleaded for pardons, and others simply shared personal struggles. He tried as much as possible to read them. Quirky tidbit. Not all letters were serious. One famous note came from an 11-year-old girl named Grace Bedell, who suggested Lincoln grow a beard because all the ladies like whiskers. Lincoln actually took her advice, and his iconic look was born. You glance at him now, stroking that famous beard, as he squints at another envelope, and think, "Thanks, Grace." Historians still argue whether Lincoln's dedication to reading mail was a genuine commitment to democracy, or a clever way to shape his public image. Was he really absorbing the voices of common people, or was he skimming enough to appear approachable? Either way, his pen-scratched replies often enough that citizens felt noticed. You peek at one letter. The handwriting loops across the page, pleading for Lincoln to save a relative from military conscription. Another letter begs for a job in Washington, promising loyalty and hard work. Yet another, more eccentric, offers him a new kind of cannon design, drawn in wobbly ink sketches that look like they were invented during a fever dream. Lincoln chuckles softly, shaking his head. "Everyone's got an idea for saving the Union," he mutters. The morning drags on, letter after letter. The scratching of his pen becomes a kind of sleepy soundtrack. Sometimes he writes a full response, carefully phrased. Other times he simply scribbles notes for his secretaries to handle later. You notice he has a particular way of leaning far back in his chair when thinking, legs stretched out, eyes half closed, as if weighing the fate of the Union while pretending to nap. Every so often he reads something aloud. One letter is so full of spelling mistakes you can't help but laugh. Lincoln, amused, says, "If spelling wins wars, we're doomed." That's your second laugh of the morning, and it makes the room feel lighter for a moment. But then comes a heavier piece, a report from a general describing casualties after a skirmish. Lincoln reads silently, face tightening. The air in the room shifts heavier now, as if even the wallpaper knows. He sets it aside slowly, not commenting, just pressing his lips together, as though words would only worsen the silence. Your mind wanders as he continues the ritual. Open, scan, sigh, respond. The room grows warmer as sunlight sneaks in through the windows, lighting up the piles of envelopes like miniature snowdrifts. You realize you could nap right here, lulled by the rhythm of paper shuffling. Lincoln leans back again, rubbing his temples. You'd think being president meant decisions, he murmurs, but most days it just means reading other people's troubles. The line hangs in the air, honest and weary. Another letter this time, a strange one, catches his eye. Someone has written, suggesting the use of balloons for spying on Confederate positions. Lincoln actually perks up at this, intrigued. He sets it aside in a special pile, maybe to revisit later. You imagine him thinking, why not balloons can't be worse than half my generals? The clock ticks past mid-morning. Lincoln has made a dent in the mountain of correspondence, but the mountain doesn't look any smaller. If anything, it seems to grow whenever you blink. You rub your eyes, wondering how he keeps going. Finally, he drops the last open letter onto the table with a soft thud. That's enough to keep me awake, he says, and you both know the letters will keep coming tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. There is no end to this river of ink. He rises slowly, his long frame unfolding like a tired accordion, and gestures toward the door. Time for the next duty, gathering the cabinet for their morning shuffle of arguments and decisions. You stretch, realizing you're already exhausted, and the day has barely started. You follow Lincoln through the corridor, shoes tapping lightly on the wooden floors that creak with each step. The atmosphere of the White House shifts now from quiet solitude to hushed anticipation. Somewhere ahead, you can already hear voices, men clearing their throats, chairs scraping, the faint shuffle of papers being arranged. Lincoln is headed into one of his cabinet meetings, and you're tagging along, bracing yourself for hours of serious talk mixed with moments of accidental comedy. The cabinet chamber is not particularly grand. You might expect chandeliers and polished mahogany, but instead, you find a long, serviceable table, ink stains on the surface, and windows that don't quite keep the drafts out. Around the table sit the men of the hour, William Seward, Secretary of State, with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue; Salmon Chase, Secretary of the Treasury, radiating ambition so strongly you could use it as a lantern; Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War, whose beard seems almost more imposing than his personality; and several others who each bring their own agendas. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln's cabinet was famously dubbed a team of rivals. Many of these men had once opposed him for the presidency, yet he brought them in anyway, believing a diversity of strong opinions would strengthen the administration. This often meant his mornings began with fiery debates rather than cozy agreement. Quirky tidbit: Lincoln had a habit of slipping humor into even the most tense cabinet discussions. At one particularly heated moment, he once read aloud a chapter from a comedic book by his favorite humorist, Artemus Ward. The secretaries were baffled until Lincoln calmly moved back to war planning as though nothing odd had happened. Imagine pausing a meeting about military strategy to read stand-up comedy. That's Lincoln for you. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's use of humor in these meetings was a deliberate strategy to diffuse tension, or simply his natural personality shining through. Some think he wielded jokes like a weapon. Others think he just couldn't help himself. Today, as you watch, the meeting begins in its usual fashion. Papers, shuffled notes, red polite coughs exchanged. Seward dives straight into foreign policy, worrying about Britain and France, sniffing around the Confederacy like nosy neighbors. Chase raises concerns about money, and surprise more money. Stanton grumbles about supplies generals and the latest string of frustrations from the front lines. The table is soon alive with overlapping voices like a chorus of owls, all insisting their hoot matters most. Lincoln listens more than he speaks, at first his long fingers drumming on the table. Every so often he leans back, stretching his legs under the table until they nearly bump yours. He looks as though he's half asleep, but then bam, he cuts through the noise with a single pointed question that resets the entire discussion. At one point, Stanton slams down a report so forcefully that the inkwell wobbles. Lincoln peers at him calmly and says, "Edwin, I'd ask you not to break the furniture it costs more to replace than the Army's boots." A ripple of laughter passes around the table, softening the storm. Stanton scowls, but also chuckles despite himself. You realize Lincoln knows exactly when to slip in a joke, just as tempers threaten to boil. You sink deeper into your chair as the meeting stretches on. The topics blur together: supplies, railroads, troop movements, diplomacy. But the cadence of voices becomes oddly soothing, like a lullaby of political jargon. Your eyes grow heavy until Lincoln suddenly raises his voice with a firm, "Gentlemen." The room freezes. He outlines a decision sharp and clear, and just like that, the arguments collapse into grudging agreement. The clock ticks, and the meeting eventually sputters to an end. Papers are gathered, chairs scraped back, and the secretaries shuffle out, each muttering under his breath about what was said or not said. The air is still buzzing with energy, like the hum after a thunderstorm. Lincoln lingers behind, still seated at the table. He stares at the empty chairs, then at you, almost amused. "They'll be back tomorrow, you know," he says. You nod, realizing that every morning brings another round of this endless push and pull. For now, though, the room is quiet again. Lincoln rises slowly, straightening his tall frame, brushing dust from his sleeve. "Come along," he says softly. Already heading toward the next duty of the day, the endless line of visitors waiting to plead their cases outside his office door. You sigh, realizing there will be no nap, no pause, no break, not yet. You shuffle behind Lincoln as he makes his way toward the waiting room just outside his office. The air changes again. It's thicker now, filled with expectation. You can almost feel the heat of 100 desperate stares pressing through the walls. This is the daily parade of petitioners, and Lincoln must face them one by one. When the door opens, you see them, a line of men and women snaking across the corridor, some clutching papers, some clutching hats, all clutching hope. They range from neatly dressed businessmen to ragged soldiers on leave from nervous mothers to slick-talking opportunists. Each one carries the belief that their personal matter is important enough to interrupt the president's morning. And in a way, they're right. Lincoln is known for making time, even if it costs him his own. Mainstream historical fact. Lincoln routinely met with ordinary citizens who sought jobs, pardons, or personal favors. Unlike many leaders, he believed in keeping his door open to the public, which often meant long stretches of his day were consumed by hearing appeals. Quirky tidbit. One visitor once asked Lincoln for a pass to see his sick mother. Lincoln granted it, but jokingly remarked that he hoped it wasn't the same mother who'd been sick last week. Apparently, people reused the same excuse repeatedly, and Lincoln's memory was sharper than they thought. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's accessibility was admirable statesmanship or reckless time-wasting. Some admire his humility in hearing common voices. Others suggest he might have achieved more had he delegated ruthlessly instead of indulging so many pleas. You stand against the wall as the first petitioner steps forward. A farmer clutches a letter, stammering as he explains his son has been mistakenly drafted. Lincoln listens patiently, eyes kind, then jots a quick note to the War Department. Next comes a woman with trembling hands begging for a government clerkship so she can feed her children. Lincoln leans forward, voice soft, asking gentle questions before sending her request to his secretary. The line creeps on. A soldier limps in uniform, threadbare, requesting a furlough to return home. Lincoln grants it with a nod, his own eyes heavy as if sharing the man's exhaustion. Another fellow, more polished, presses an envelope forward with a grand idea for reorganizing the army. Lincoln scans the contents, lips twitching. "If my generals can't manage it," he says dryly, "I doubt this envelope can." You notice how Lincoln treats each visitor with the same deliberate courtesy. He never rushes, even though you can see his energy draining like water from a leaky bucket. He leans back in his chair between requests, long legs stretched out as if bracing for the next wave of humanity. Every so often, humor cracks the solemn air. One petitioner nervously rambles for so long that Lincoln interrupts, smiling. "My friend, if I grant you more time, we'll both starve before lunch." The room chuckles, even the nervous petitioner, and the tension lifts for a moment. You can't help but wonder how he manages this daily. Each story is a little heartbreak, a little problem, a little hope laid at his feet. The cumulative weight is exhausting to witness, let alone to carry. And yet, Lincoln never snaps, never waves them off. He listens, notes, signs, reassures. As the line slowly dwindles, you realize you've witnessed a strange ritual democracy in its most exhausting form. Not speeches, not rallies, but one tired man meeting his citizens face to face, absorbing their troubles like a sponge. Finally, the last petitioner bows hat in hand and shuffles out. The room falls quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock. Lincoln exhales heavily, rubbing his temples, beard bristling under his hand. He glances at you with a half smile. "Well," he says softly, "I suppose that's half the country taken care of." You're not sure if he's joking or not. Probably both. He pushes himself up from the chair, his tall frame rising once again to its full height, and gestures toward the study. There are speeches to draft, documents to read, and most likely more interruptions waiting around the corner. You drag your feet wishing for a nap, while Lincoln trudges forward, as though duty itself pulls him by the sleeve. The day is far from over, and you are only beginning to understand just how endless it really feels. You trudge along behind Lincoln as he returns to his study, still carrying the weight of the morning's visitors, and the faint scent of ink and paper clings to his coat like a shadow. The room has warmed slightly, the sun inching higher through the windows, but the air still carries a chill sharp against your skin. Lincoln sits back at his desk, long legs stretching under the worn surface, and you realize that this man's mind never stops, even when his body wants to rest. There is a rhythm here, subtle and hypnotic, that marks the flow of the day. Rise, eat, meet, people, read, write, think. Now comes a moment that almost everyone in Lincoln's life would have recognized, the quiet, repetitive work that he pursued like a monk, chanting psalms, drafting speeches, writing notes, and preparing memoranda, a lawyer's mind at work, long before the courtrooms or war councils beckoned. Mainstream historical fact. Lincoln was an accomplished lawyer before he became president, and he carried the meticulous habits of the courtroom into the Oval Office. He drafted letters, analyzed legal documents, and crafted arguments with the same careful precision he once applied to cases in Illinois. You watch as he bends over a sheet of paper, scratching, erasing, and rewriting with a pen that seems to know every movement of his hand. Quirky tidbit. Lincoln had a habit of walking while thinking, pacing long paths in his study or in the halls, muttering legal phrasing under his breath. Sometimes he would pace so vigorously that the ink on the papers he'd just written smudged, leaving behind what looked like abstract art. You glance down at his desk, and notice faint smears, thinking that perhaps even a president's mistakes can look artistic in hindsight. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's early legal training directly influenced his presidency or whether his natural intellect would have sufficed without it. Some argue that his painstaking attention to logic, detail, and narrative helped him craft speeches that swayed the nation, while others suggest that his empathy and moral compass played an even larger role. Watching him now, it's easy to see both sides, the disciplined lawyer and the deeply thoughtful human. You notice the way he handles each document. He does not rush. A military report is read, set aside, then revisited with small annotations that might indicate a note for a secretary or a personal reminder. A speech draft is examined almost obsessively, each word weighed for clarity, impact, and subtle persuasion. Occasionally, he reads a passage aloud, murmuring the phrasing to see how it sounds. It's hypnotic, the sound of a long measured voice, a scratching pen, and the soft shuffle of paper create a lullaby for anyone observing silently. His office is sparse, yet filled with details that hint at personality. A simple stovepipe hat rests on a chair, a few books are stacked unevenly on the shelf, and the walls are bare enough that shadows stretch long across the floor as sunlight moves. Every movement he makes seems deliberate. A lean here, a stretch there, the gentle tap of fingers against the table. You find yourself almost syncing with his rhythm, breathing in and out as he does slow and steady. Every so often, Lincoln pauses to reflect. He might lift his head, stare out the window, and let his mind drift for a moment. The world outside continues without him. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones, distant voices in the street, the whisper of wind through leaves. But inside it is only him, the ink, and the quiet contemplation that seems to pull you along in its hypnotic rhythm. A small, humorous moment breaks the monotony. Lincoln glances at a draft of a letter that seems particularly verbose and mutters, "If only the author had used fewer words, perhaps we'd both be awake by noon." You chuckle softly, realizing that even in the midst of serious work, he allows himself a little levity. It's one of those moments that humanizes a figure so often elevated to mythic proportions. The pile of papers is vast, yet Lincoln methodically works through them, much like a farmer tending rows of crops, pulling weeds, planting seeds of ideas, and nurturing them carefully. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the invisible weight of decisions yet to be made, consequences not yet realized. And still, he moves with a calm that seems impossible, given the stakes. You notice that Lincoln occasionally pauses mid-task to think aloud. A line in a speech might not feel right. He taps it gently with the pen, erases, and tries again. He doesn't rush. There's a patience here that seems alien in a world obsessed with speed, a slow, careful crafting of words and intentions. Each sentence is measured as if it carries the weight of the nation itself. As the morning wanes, Lincoln leans back, stretches, and takes a brief moment to breathe. He looks tired, but his eyes still gleam with quiet focus. You realize that these hours of solitary, disciplined labor are as important as any public address, any cabinet decision, any battlefield strategy. They are the hidden engine that keeps the day and perhaps the country moving forward. Finally, he sets aside the last draft for a moment of pause, running a hand through his hair. The pen lies idle, but the mind does not. You feel the pull of this unending intellectual current, the gravity of responsibility that shapes every gesture, every choice. And as you linger in the quiet of the office, the tick of the clock becomes almost musical, a rhythm for reflection, patience, and the slow unfolding of history. You trudge along after Lincoln, still adjusting to the rhythm of his long morning. The sun is climbing higher now, brushing the edges of the White House windows with a soft glow, and the corridors feel warmer, though the air still carries a faint chill from the early hour. Ahead, you hear a low murmur of movement, another type of activity is about to begin. This is the part of the day when goods and supplies arrive, the tangible tokens of a world outside these walls, reminders that even the president cannot exist in complete isolation. Mainstream historical fact. The White House regularly received deliveries from merchants, traveling peddlers, and foreign contacts. These ranged from everyday necessities to curiosities from distant lands, reflecting the president's engagement not just with policy, but with commerce and culture. Quirky tidbit: Lincoln once received a small alligator as a diplomatic gift. The creature caused a minor stir before being relocated. You can almost picture the scene now: porters carefully balancing crates, servants peeking nervously, and Lincoln towering over the parcels, inspecting them with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's attention to such arrivals reflected strategic insight or simple curiosity. Some suggest he gleaned cultural and economic knowledge from these goods. Others think it was merely a personal fascination, a brief reprieve from the weight of governance. A crate arrives stuffed with spices, pepper, cloves, a hint of nutmeg, the aroma rolling through the room like an invisible tide. Lincoln lifts each packet, feeling the weight, smelling the exotic scent, as if it were evidence of far-off markets and distant lands. You breathe it in too, the fragrance faintly dizzying in its novelty. It is a rare sensory pleasure in a day dominated by paperwork and politics. Next comes a small bundle of textiles, soft wools, hand-woven patterns, threads dyed in muted indigos and earthy browns. Lincoln strokes the fabrics, noting their texture, thickness, and craftsmanship. He allows himself a brief nod of approval before setting them aside, his long fingers brushing lightly against the fibers. Even mundane materials receive care. Each item carries a story, a connection to someone somewhere. A third crate holds dried fruits, each carefully wrapped. Lincoln inspects a small cluster of figs, shiny and slightly soft, and murmurs, "Even kings could not taste better in some lands." You can't help but smile at the phrase, imagining him savoring the tiny pleasure before moving on. The moment is fleeting, but grounding a brief window into his humanity amid the relentless duties of office. Small toys arrive, next a set of carved wooden horses from a visiting child. Lincoln lifts them gently, eyeing the craftsmanship, and says with a quiet smile, "A fine cavalry indeed." You note the subtle humor, the way he allows himself a flicker of amusement, even in a room filled with duty and expectation. The rhythm of arrivals continues. Crates are opened, items examined, gifts acknowledged, and everyday necessities stored. Lincoln's attention is deliberate, measured. He treats every package, every letter, every object as worthy of notice. Watching him, you realize that even in the mundane he finds purpose and connection. By the time the last crate is sorted, the room feels ordered, quiet, and faintly fragrant with spices and wood. Lincoln stands, brushes his coat, and surveys his work. The interlude of these small arrivals has provided a subtle reprieve, a grounding ritual before the day's heavier tasks resume. You follow him, already feeling the tug of exhaustion, as he moves toward the reports from the war front, a reminder that the day is far from over and his responsibilities stretch endlessly ahead. You trudge along behind Lincoln, the morning light now spilling more steadily through the White House windows, hinting that the day is well underway. After the measured quiet of letter writing and document review, you notice a subtle shift in pace, the arrival of visitors bringing tangible worldly items rather than correspondence. It is a different rhythm, a more physical reminder of the outside world, the clatter of a carriage wheel on cobblestones, the murmur of porters hauling parcels, the faint metallic scent of coin. Today, like many days, the White House receives packages and goods from distant cities, some practical, some curious, all demanding Lincoln's attention. Mainstream historical fact. During Lincoln's presidency, The White House received an array of packages and gifts from foreign dignitaries, military contractors, and ordinary citizens. Some were practical items, others symbolic, and a few downright strange, reflecting both the connections and the eccentricities of the era. Quirky tidbit. Lincoln once received a gift of a small live alligator from a visiting diplomat. The creature caused minor chaos before being politely relocated. You imagine the chaos now, crates being opened, guards and servants tiptoeing around Lincoln's tall frame, looming as he inspects each item with a mix of curiosity and mild amusement. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's attentiveness to these physical arrivals was a sign of strategic oversight or simply a reflection of his natural curiosity. Some suggest he used these moments to understand culture, politics, and trade trends, while others argue he might have been easily distracted from more pressing matters. You watch as a porter places a bundle of dried spices onto Lincoln's desk. The scent wafts upward, pepper cloves a hint of nutmeg, small reminders of distant markets and trades. He opens the package carefully, inspecting the contents. For a man so often consumed by politics and law, these small sensory encounters offer brief, almost meditative moments of connection to a world beyond memoranda and council rooms. Nearby, a simple crate contains textiles perhaps ordered for the White House household, perhaps sent as a gift. Lincoln lifts a piece, noting its texture, thickness, and pattern. Your eyes wander over the colors, muted indigo, earthy browns, a hint of red thread woven carefully through each weave. These colors, though subtle, provide a quiet visual pleasure in a day otherwise dominated by gray paper and somber decisions. Another package reveals dried fruits, each carefully wrapped. You notice a small cluster of figs, shiny and soft. Lincoln examines them, raising an eyebrow, and says softly, "Even kings could not taste better in some lands." He passes them to a nearby aide, who stows them carefully. There is a reverent, almost ritualistic air in the handling of these goods. You start to sense a rhythm to these arrivals. Crates are opened, items examined, gifts politely acknowledged, mundane packages filed or set aside. Lincoln inspects everything, yet moves with calm efficiency, the gestures deliberate, the attention even. It is easy to lose track of time, lulled by the low hum of activity and the soft rustle of paper, fabric, and packaging. The quiet humor of the morning persists. Lincoln chuckles softly as he unwraps a bundle of small toys sent by a visiting child, tiny wooden horses and carved figures. "A fine cavalry," he murmurs, eyes twinkling with amusement. The room feels lighter for a moment, despite the weight of responsibility pressing down around the walls. As you linger, you notice how even mundane items, honey, dried beans, a small pot, receive the same careful attention. To Lincoln, every arrival matters. Every item has context, a story, a potential use or lesson. You realize that in these interactions, he connects not only to the immediate physical world, but also to the lives and efforts of those who sent them. By mid-morning, the packages are sorted. Crates are moved, gifts placed in designated spots, and the White House settles back into its quiet rhythm. Lincoln stands, brushing his coat lightly as he surveys the now orderly desk. For a fleeting moment, the room is calm, orderly, and scented faintly with spices and fresh wood, a small pocket of serenity in a day otherwise destined to be long and demanding. You follow him as he moves toward his next task, reading reports from the war front. You feel the gentle tug of exhaustion, knowing the day is still young and yet already rich with sensory, mental, and emotional labor. These brief interludes, the opening of parcels, the inspection of curiosities, remain small but grounding threads in the otherwise relentless fabric of Lincoln's daily life. You trudge after Lincoln down the quiet corridor, the echo of your footsteps blending with the faint rustle of papers and distant murmurs from rooms you've already passed. The White House feels both immense and oddly intimate, like a living organism that breathes with its inhabitants. Now comes another ritual of his day, the review of military dispatches, reports from generals, and updates from the ever-complicated war front. You brace yourself. This is the heartbeat of Lincoln's presidency, slow and relentless, and you are about to witness it in meticulous, almost hypnotic detail. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln spent considerable portions of each day reading reports from Union generals and field officers. He took an active role in military strategy, often offering input on troop movements, logistics, and engagements, despite having no formal military training. His correspondence with commanders was methodical and demanding, reflecting his deep investment in the outcome of the Civil War. Quirky tidbit: Lincoln sometimes annotated reports with humorous sketches or small doodles. A particularly confusing map might be accompanied by a stick-figure soldier waving a flag, perhaps as a way to lighten his own mental load. You glance at a report he sets aside. Sure enough, a tiny pencil sketch flutters at the corner, a silent wink amid the grim details of strategy. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's hands-on approach to military matters was a masterstroke of leadership or an overreach that sometimes confused professional generals. Some claim his strategic intuition saved countless lives and victories. Others contend that he could have left decisions to trained officers and focused on broader policy. Watching him now, it's easy to see the tension of balancing intellect, instinct, and responsibility. You watch as he opens a thick envelope. Inside is a report on troop positions along the Mississippi River. He traces the lines lightly with a finger, following movements that must have taken weeks to chart. A small sigh escapes his lips, as if the weight of hundreds of men and their fates presses down on him physically. You feel it too, a subtle heaviness settling in the room. The next report details supplies, ammunition, food, and clothing. Lincoln leans back, stroking his chin, and mutters to himself, "If only paper could march alongside men, we might be done by now." You allow a soft laugh, the sound slipping quietly into the otherwise solemn atmosphere. Even amid the urgency of war, moments of dry humor punctuate his day. A particularly dense dispatch from a general in Tennessee catches his attention. Lincoln reads aloud a passage describing a skirmish that went poorly, noting troop fatigue and morale issues. He jots a brief note at the bottom address, promptly, "Don't let despair take root." The simplicity of the instruction belies the immense weight of command behind it. You are struck by the careful balance of empathy and authority. In his words, the precision honed over countless hours of similar decisions. Occasionally, he pauses, leaning back with his legs, stretched eyes half closed. You notice how his body language mirrors the careful pacing of his mind, thoughtful, deliberate, but never rushed. You might even start to drift with the rhythm, lulled by the measured cadence of reading, annotation, and reflection. Another report arrives with maps of troop positions near Richmond. Lincoln studies the details with quiet concentration, occasionally whispering to himself, "Perhaps here, perhaps there we shall see." Each map, each note, each figure represents not just strategy, but human lives, hundreds, sometimes thousands. The weight is palpable, and yet he handles it with a calm that seems almost superhuman. The morning wears on as he continues through report after report, scribbling notes, sketching ideas, and occasionally chuckling at the eccentric suggestions of ambitious or inexperienced commanders. You realize that this deliberate, almost ritualistic review is essential to his leadership, a slow, attentive threading of information into judgment, ensuring that no detail, however small, is overlooked. By midday, Lincoln pauses for a moment, placing the last dispatch aside. He stretches his tall frame and lets out a long breath, eyes wandering briefly to the sunlight streaming through the windows. The reports have been read, annotated, and filed, but the war outside continues unabated. For a brief moment, the room is quiet, almost serene a lull between the relentless currents of conflict and decision-making. You realize that witnessing this is both exhausting and mesmerizing. Every pen stroke, every scribbled note, every careful reading of paper carries immense weight. Lincoln moves from one report to the next, with a gentle determination that seems to pull time along slowly, forcing you to adjust to his measured pace. This is the rhythm of leadership drawn out in painstaking detail, and it is hypnotic in its quiet insistence. You trudge alongside Lincoln as he transitions from reports to correspondence, the atmosphere shifting once more. The room now hums with a quiet intensity, as stacks of letters sit in neat piles awaiting his careful attention. Each envelope carries a story, a plea, or a tiny fragment of someone's life pressed into paper and ink. It is an intimate side of leadership, less visible to the public, yet essential. You feel a peculiar sense of weight, knowing that these small scraps of communication hold real consequence, even if they seem mundane at first glance. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln personally read thousands of letters each year from citizens, soldiers, and politicians alike. He often responded personally or dictated replies to his secretaries, showing a remarkable commitment to correspondence in addition to his other presidential duties. Quirky tidbit: some letters were unusual, like one that reportedly requested Lincoln to appoint the writer's pet dog as a government official. Lincoln, with his characteristic dry wit, penned a reply expressing regret that the position was already filled. You can almost hear the suppressed chuckle as he dictated the note to his secretary. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's extensive personal engagement with correspondence was an effective tool of governance or an indulgence that consumed valuable time. Some suggest it strengthened his connection to the public and provided valuable insight. Others believe it risked distracting him from critical policy decisions. You watch as Lincoln selects the first letter from a neat stack, unfolding the paper with care. It is from a soldier requesting leave to see his family. Lincoln reads it slowly, tracing the words with a long finger. He pauses, then jots a note, approving the request, careful to add a reminder to check troop availability. The procedure seems almost ritualistic, a deliberate cadence of reading, reflecting, and responding. The next letter is from a mother pleading for her son's safety. Lincoln reads the words aloud softly, almost as if testing them in the air, then scribbles a response of reassurance. There is a gentle gravity to his actions, the kind of attention that shows respect for the lives contained within the paper. Each envelope is a tiny portal into human experience, and Lincoln treats them with extraordinary care. A particularly long letter arrives from a small town requesting federal support for infrastructure improvements. Lincoln studies it meticulously, occasionally murmuring observations about resource allocation or logistical feasibility. You notice how he balances empathy with practical judgment, weighing every word before committing to action. The rhythm is slow, almost meditative, and you feel your own senses adjusting to the measured pace. Occasionally, humor lightens the load. A letter from a constituent includes a comically exaggerated complaint about local taxes. Lincoln reads it aloud, raising an eyebrow, then scribbles a brief note to his secretary. "Tell them their gold is safe for now." You chuckle softly, realizing that even amid weighty matters, humor remains a vital thread in his day. Some letters are accompanied by small gifts or tokens, a pressed flower, a drawing, or a bit of homemade candy. Lincoln handles these delicately, acknowledging the gesture before filing them appropriately. You notice how such small interactions, seemingly trivial, humanize the enormous machinery of government. As the morning stretches toward noon, Lincoln continues through the correspondence with unhurried precision. Each envelope, each note, is treated as an opportunity to listen, respond, and connect. The stack gradually diminishes, and the room feels lighter, though the weight of responsibility never truly lifts. You begin to sense the quiet rhythm of Lincoln's day, The careful pacing, the balance of duty and humanity, the intertwining of seriousness and gentle levity. Finally, he leans back, hands folded over a long, slender pen, eyes briefly closing. The letters are mostly read, the urgent matters addressed, and a calm settles over the study. You understand in this slow, deliberate observation how vital these moments are, the quiet, patient attention to the lives of others. It is both exhausting and oddly soothing to watch a lullaby of leadership in its most intimate form. You follow Lincoln as he rises from the desk, stretching his tall frame, the soft creak of the chair echoing slightly in the quiet study. The morning has worn on with measured precision, letters read, reports analyzed, visitors attended. Now another ritual begins, the careful review of incoming petitions and requests from lawmakers, lobbyists, and advocates. Unlike the personal letters from ordinary citizens, these communications carry political weight, subtle pressures, and the faint hum of influence. You feel a quiet tension in the room, the sense that every note might shape policy perception or future decisions. Mainstream historical fact, Lincoln regularly reviewed petitions from congressmen and interest groups, balancing competing demands while maintaining his own policy priorities. This was a crucial aspect of presidential life, requiring discernment, patience, and strategic judgment. Quirky tidbit. Some petitioners were extraordinarily persistent, sending multiple letters about trivial matters. Lincoln reportedly kept a sense of humor about these, sometimes replying with playful remarks or subtle illustrations, a small rebellion against the monotony of repetitive requests. You imagine him sketching a tiny caricature of a concerned lobbyist in the margin of a note, smirking quietly as he does so. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's careful attention to petitions strengthened Democratic engagement or unnecessarily consumed time better spent on broader strategy. Some argue that his accessibility reinforced the public's trust. Others claim it risked distraction from critical governance. You watch as he lifts a neatly folded petition, reading it carefully. It concerns a proposed infrastructure project in a distant state. Lincoln examines the details, occasionally tracing routes on a map spread across his desk. He jots a brief note to a secretary, approving certain aspects while requesting additional information on logistics. The action is deliberate, almost meditative, and the slow rhythm is soothing in its precision. The next petition is more delicate, a request for intervention in a local dispute between townspeople. Lincoln reads the account aloud, his voice calm and measured, then scribbles a careful note suggesting a review by federal authorities. You notice the balance he strikes between empathy and practicality, ensuring fairness while respecting local governance. A small humorous aside appears in one letter. A legislator requests that Lincoln appoint a friend's cat as an official pest controller. He glances at the note with a faint smile and jots a reply, declining politely. The tiny moment of levity punctuates the otherwise serious atmosphere, reminding you that humor often threads quietly through even the most weighty responsibilities. Some petitions involve urgent financial matters, approvals for war-related contracts, relief funds for affected families, or resources for local governments. Lincoln reviews each with meticulous care, calculating, considering potential consequences, and ensuring that each decision aligns with broader policy objectives. The precision is hypnotic. You feel yourself drawn into the slow cadence of analysis, reflection, and judgment. The room itself seems to echo this measured pace. Sunlight filters in through tall windows, glinting off inkwells and scattered papers. The scent of aged wood ink and faint candle wax lingers. Lincoln moves deliberately, handling each sheet with care, annotating margins, folding and stacking letters, preparing them for filing or further action. It is a choreography of quiet authority, disciplined, unhurried, and entirely absorbing. As the morning approaches noon, Lincoln pauses for a moment, lifting his gaze to the window. He lets out a long breath, eyes resting briefly on the brightening sky. You sense the careful mental sorting that has been taking place, weighing priorities, balancing empathy with policy, and threading each action into the fabric of governance. It is exhausting to observe, and yet strangely mesmerizing, this ritual of attention, patience, and quiet resolve. Finally, he leans back in his chair, the last petition noted and filed. A small, gentle smile crosses his face, a fleeting acknowledgement of work done well, a silent nod to the balance he maintains between duty and humanity. You remain standing, taking in the rhythm of his labor, understanding, in a calm, slow way, the intricate, patient dance of leadership that unfolds day after day within these walls. You trudge after Lincoln as he moves toward the side room, where his cabinet reports are waiting. The morning light, now softer, warming the wooden floors with a golden hue. The hum of activity has settled into a quiet background, the distant shuffle of staff, the muted scrape of pens, and the occasional cough echo faintly. Here the rhythm of the day shifts again. It is time for careful reading, the deliberation of policy matters, and the balancing of competing priorities across a nation at war. You feel a subtle tension, not sharp, but persistent, like the faint pressure of a tide slowly rising. Mainstream historical fact. Lincoln was known for his meticulous attention to cabinet reports, memoranda, and intelligence briefings, reviewing each in detail before discussing matters with his advisors. This methodical review allowed him to make informed decisions and maintain oversight over the vast machinery of government during the Civil War. Quirky tidbit. Lincoln reportedly had a habit of doodling small caricatures of his cabinet members in the margins of reports, perhaps imagining them debating earnestly over a teacup or quarreling like children. You glance at a stack of papers nearby and imagine tiny sketches, humorous and irreverent, nestled in the corners of otherwise serious documents. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's focus on reading cabinet reports daily reflected wise vigilance or an over-involvement that might have slowed the decision-making process. Some argue that it kept him closely attuned to details that others overlooked. Others suggest he could have delegated more without compromising effectiveness. You watch as he opens the first report, thick with financial figures and troop requisitions. He leans forward, brow furrowed in concentration, tracing columns of numbers with his finger. A soft sigh escapes him, not of frustration, but of quiet absorption, as if the minutiae of bureaucracy is both puzzle and companion. You notice the deliberate slowness of his movements, each action measured, each decision given careful thought. The next memorandum discusses the allocation of war funds across several states. Lincoln pauses, tapping the edge of the paper gently with a long finger, contemplating both immediate needs and long-term consequences. You sense that the mental arithmetic is as heavy as any physical labor, each number carrying implications for human lives and regional stability. A humorous interlude arises as he reads a report from a junior official who included an excessively formal greeting and several repetitive paragraphs. Lincoln shakes his head slightly, muttering, "Exuberance should not be mistaken for clarity." You allow a quiet smile to escape the momentary levity punctuating the dense seriousness of the room. Another document contains a recommendation for reorganizing supply chains to improve efficiency. Lincoln studies it carefully, underlining key points and scribbling notes in the margins. You notice how he combines logic with instinct, a careful weighing of what is practical, possible, and morally sound. The process is slow but hypnotic, almost meditative, drawing you into the rhythm of governance. Occasionally, he leans back, stretches, and closes his eyes briefly, letting the mind process information in a way that seems invisible but essential. You feel the tempo of the room, a slow, deliberate heartbeat, each pulse a connection between information, decision, and responsibility. By mid-morning, several reports have been read, annotated, and set aside. The room is calm, the sunlight catching the edges of papers and the tops of inkwells. Lincoln's gaze drifts momentarily out the window, as if seeking perspective beyond the documents, beyond the walls, beyond the day itself. You feel the quiet gravity of this period, understanding that the slow, patient scrutiny of details is as vital as the grand gestures of policy or the commanding presence in public. Finally, he picks up the last report, nods to himself, and sets it aside. The cabinet reports have been attended to, each decision noted, and each question considered. A hush settles over the room, almost ceremonial in its completion. You realize, watching him move with such calm precision, that leadership is a mosaic of countless small actions, each deliberate, each meaningful, and each requiring an almost monastic patience. You trudge along behind Lincoln as he leaves the side room, stretching his long frame and allowing his shoulders a brief release from the constant tension of decision-making. The morning sunlight filters gently through the tall windows, casting long, soft shadows across the polished floors. Now comes a different kind of work meetings with advisors and aides, the subtle choreography of discussion, the exchange of ideas, and the careful negotiation of perspectives. You feel the slow energy of this ritual, attentive listening, measured responses, and the quiet rhythm of deliberation. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln regularly held meetings with his cabinet and advisors to discuss war strategy, political developments, and domestic policies. These sessions were critical for aligning governmental actions and ensuring that decisions reflected a broad spectrum of expertise. Quirky tidbit. It is said that Lincoln sometimes invited his cabinet members to take turns reading aloud humorous or eccentric letters from constituents to break the monotony and lighten the mood. You imagine a cluster of grown men, some serious, some fidgeting, reading about absurd petitions, while Lincoln suppresses a quiet chuckle. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's informal approach to cabinet meetings encouraged open dialogue or sometimes risked undermining authority. Some claim his relaxed style fostered creativity and honesty. Others suggest it occasionally led to confusion or overly long discussions. You observe, as Lincoln guides the discussion, his tall figure leaning slightly toward each speaker, listening intently, absorbing every word. One advisor presents a strategy for troop movements in the Western theater. Lincoln nods slowly, tapping a pen against the tabletop, tracing imaginary lines on a map, his mind evaluating logistics, morale, and timing. The pace is deliberate. The exchange measured, the rhythm soothing in its consistency. Another aide raises a concern about supply shortages. Lincoln folds his hands, listening carefully, then asks a few probing questions. His tone is gentle but firm, drawing out answers without imposing his own judgment prematurely. You notice how he balances patience with authority, allowing ideas to unfold fully before interjecting, and how this slow, intentional approach shapes the conversation. A light moment punctuates the session when a particularly nervous young aide drops a stack of papers. Lincoln leans over, helping to gather them, and quips softly, "Even the most organized war can be interrupted by gravity." You smile at the understated humor, a rare thread of levity woven into the otherwise disciplined proceedings. The discussions continue, sometimes serious, sometimes technical, always deliberate. Lincoln asks clarifying questions, repeats points for emphasis, and occasionally pauses to reflect. You notice how he invites contributions from quieter members, ensuring every perspective is heard while maintaining the gentle flow of conversation. At one point, a debate arises over the timing of a supply convoy. Lincoln listens, fingers steepled, weighing arguments in real time. You feel the tension of the decision without pressure, an intellectual push and pull, conducted at a slow, almost hypnotic pace, allowing every nuance to be considered. By mid-morning, the meeting winds down. Notes are taken, follow-ups assigned, and plans tentatively confirmed. Lincoln leans back in his chair, exhaling softly, and allows a moment of stillness. The room once filled with discussion and debate now hums with a calm sense of completion. You sense that these hours, slow and methodical, are as essential to leadership as any public speech or policy announcement. Finally, Lincoln rises, adjusting his coat, eyes scanning the now quiet room. The cabinet meeting has concluded, yet the day stretches on full of duties, letters, and decisions. You follow silently, absorbing the gentle cadence of his work, the deliberate patience, and the steady, soothing rhythm that underpins the immense responsibilities of guiding a nation. You trudge behind Lincoln as he leaves the cabinet room, his long legs carrying him steadily down the corridor. The mid-morning light filters softly through the windows, warming the polished wood floors and highlighting the faint dust motes dancing in the air. Now comes another layer of his daily rhythm, meetings with visiting citizens, dignitaries, and petitioners. The White House hums with quiet anticipation as aides prepare introductions, ushering guests in one at a time. You feel the subtle shift in energy, the world outside pressing in, yet moving slowly enough that you can almost follow its measured cadence. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln regularly met with visitors at the White House, including citizens seeking assistance, foreign envoys, and politicians. These audiences allowed him to maintain public accessibility and gather first-hand impressions of political and social concerns. Quirky tidbit: some visitors arrived with peculiar requests or gifts. One reportedly brought a live turkey, hoping for presidential attention. Lincoln, reportedly amused, accepted the gift, but ensured it was redirected appropriately. You imagine the turkey flapping in a corner, while Lincoln smiles politely, accustomed to the eccentricities of the public. Historians still argue whether these audiences were a productive use of time or a distraction from more pressing governance. Some suggest they kept him grounded and informed. Others believe they could have been overwhelming given the constant stream of demands. You watch as a visitor is introduced, a local teacher seeking guidance on school funding. Lincoln gestures for them to sit, listening intently as they explain their concerns. His tall frame leans slightly forward, eyes fixed, absorbing every word. He asks thoughtful questions, balancing curiosity with genuine interest, allowing the speaker to feel heard while simultaneously collecting useful information. The next visitor is a small group representing a local farmers' cooperative. Lincoln carefully examines the details they present, nodding as he processes logistics, supply, and feasibility. You notice how his long fingers tap gently on the armrest, an almost subconscious rhythm accompanying his thought process. Each interaction is slow, deliberate, as if time itself has softened to accommodate careful consideration. A light-hearted moment appears when a young child approaches holding a small drawing. Lincoln kneels slightly, allowing the child to hand it over, and offers a gentle smile. "A fine depiction of liberty," he murmurs, and the child beams. You feel the contrast between the gravity of his duties and the simplicity of this small human connection. Another visitor presents a request for assistance with a minor infrastructure project. Lincoln reviews maps and notes, scribbling brief observations and potential follow-ups. He leans back, pondering, and then shares a recommendation, ensuring the visitor leaves with a clear sense of direction. The pace is gentle, almost ritualistic, each meeting flowing into the next with unhurried precision. As the mid-morning progresses, more visitors arrive, each one met with the same attentiveness. You begin to sense the rhythm: arrival, explanation, careful listening, thoughtful response, and a subtle but deliberate closure. Lincoln's energy remains steady, neither rushed nor flustered, his calm presence grounding the room. Occasionally, small humor emerges. A visiting merchant complains about local taxes in a melodramatic tone, and Lincoln quips softly, "Even gold must wait its turn," eliciting a quiet smile from those present. These brief, understated moments of levity punctuate the otherwise steady flow of civic engagement. By late morning, the audience has thinned. Lincoln leans slightly against the desk, taking a slow breath, eyes flicking to the sunlight streaming across the room. The rhythm of these meetings, slow, attentive, human, has provided both him and his visitors a sense of connection and purpose. You feel the gentle weight of these interactions, a delicate balancing act of empathy, policy, and presence that defines a subtle but vital part of his day. You trudge alongside Lincoln as he moves from visitor meetings back toward his study, the soft warmth of late morning settling into the White House rooms. The corridors echo faintly with the quiet shuffle of staff and the distant murmur of activity elsewhere, a gentle reminder that the building is alive with purpose. Now begins another phase of his day, reviewing newspapers, periodicals, and printed commentary. This is Lincoln's way of monitoring public sentiment, understanding debates, and keeping a slow, steady pulse on the nation beyond the walls. Mainstream historical fact. Lincoln routinely read newspapers from across the Union, often clipping articles, noting public opinion, and reflecting on political developments. This practice helped him gauge sentiment, anticipate challenges, and respond thoughtfully to emerging issues. Quirky tidbit. Lincoln reportedly sometimes read newspapers aloud to himself, using different voices for editors, reporters, and letter writers. You can imagine the tall man in his study, quietly performing a one-man newspaper drama, complete with exaggerated intonations for effect. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's focus on newspapers provided essential insight or risked overexposure to partisan bias. Some believe it enhanced his understanding of public concerns. Others think it could have skewed his perception or unnecessarily consumed time. You watch as he lifts a folded newspaper, carefully scanning the headlines, pausing to underline passages of interest. The smell of fresh ink and aged paper drifts faintly, a sensory companion to the rhythmic rustle of pages. Lincoln's eyes flick from column to column, absorbing both facts and tone, assessing not only what is reported, but how it is presented. A political cartoon catches his attention, and he leans back slightly, allowing himself a faint smile. The exaggerated depiction of a prominent politician prompts a quiet chuckle as he scribbles a note in the margin. Artistry in caricature, yet kernels of truth remain. You feel the gentle humor, subtle yet persistent, threading through the seriousness of information intake. Next, he reads a report of local protests in a northern city. Lincoln pauses, fingers, steepled eyes narrowing slightly. He reads slowly, weighing the motivations of participants, the responses of authorities, and potential implications. Every word matters. Every phrase is a piece of a larger national puzzle. The deliberate pacing allows time for reflection, the mental process unfolding like a slow-motion dance. A lighter moment appears when a newspaper recounts an unusual invention, a mechanical device promising to sort letters automatically. Lincoln shakes his head with a quiet grin. Soon perhaps the postman will be out of work, he murmurs, acknowledging the absurdity and ingenuity simultaneously. You allow yourself a small smile, appreciating how he finds subtle delight even amid weighty matters. He continues with reports of legislative debates, noting proposals, arguments, and public reactions. You see how he balances skepticism with curiosity, often jotting notes or folding pages to return later. The rhythm is slow but precise. Read, absorb, evaluate, and record each step, deliberate, ensuring no nuance escapes attention. By midday, Lincoln has reviewed multiple papers and reports his stack of clippings growing. The sunlight shifts, casting gentle patterns on the wooden floor, emphasizing the passage of time in a soft visual whisper. You notice the slow meditation inherent in his study. the intertwining of information, reflection, and quiet humor, creating a cadence that is almost hypnotic. Finally, he sets the last newspaper aside, leaning slightly back, hands resting on his lap. You feel the calm culmination of this phase, a gentle pause before the next duties of the day unfold. The rhythm of slow reading, deliberate assessment, and quiet amusement lingers, a comforting cadence in the otherwise intense world of governance. You trudge alongside Lincoln as he steps away from the newspapers, the late morning sun now warming the rooms with a mellow glow. The soft clatter of footsteps from nearby aides has faded, leaving a calm hush over the White House corridors. Now comes another slow but essential rhythm of his day, reviewing and signing official documents. These are the legal instruments that shape policy, authorize action, and cement decisions into tangible authority. You feel the weight in the room, subtle but persistent, as if each signature carries the invisible gravity of consequences across the nation. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln personally signed thousands of documents each year, ranging from military commissions to legislation and pardons. His careful attention ensured both legality and moral consideration were applied consistently across his office. Quirky tidbit: on occasion, Lincoln would test his quill on the margins, scribbling short jokes or whimsical sketches before signing official papers, almost like a private ritual, to lighten the formality. You imagine him pausing briefly, drawing a tiny stick-figure soldier, waving a flag, then leaning back to sign with steady concentration. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's hands-on involvement in routine documents was a meticulous safeguard or a distraction from broader leadership duties. Some argue it kept him intimately connected with governance. Others suggest delegation could have saved valuable time. You watch as he opens a stack of commissions for military officers. He reads each carefully, scanning names, ranks, and assignments, occasionally consulting a small reference sheet. The quill moves deliberately across the paper, a rhythmic, almost meditative action, each signature slow and purposeful. You notice the slight pressure he applies, as if imprinting not only ink, but intention onto the document. Next comes legislation requiring executive approval. Lincoln reviews the text slowly, lips moving slightly, as he reads, processing every clause. You sense the careful balance between legal requirement and ethical judgment, each decision weighed as both a matter of law and conscience. Occasionally he pauses, tapping his finger against the desk, as if listening to the silent conversation between words on paper and his own sense of justice. A lighter moment appears, with a petition for a minor pardon, accompanied by an amusing anecdote from the petitioner. Lincoln reads it aloud softly, a faint smile appearing as he considers the story, then pens a measured response, granting the pardon. You can almost hear the quiet satisfaction in his tone, a subtle acknowledgement of humanity alongside authority. He moves to documents concerning military supplies, grants, and contracts. Each paper is handled carefully, sometimes requiring small annotations or cross-references. You notice the rhythm reading, reflecting signing filing, is both deliberate and hypnotic. The meticulous nature of these tasks demands patience, yet it flows steadily like a slow river, carrying the weight of responsibility downstream. Occasionally, he leans back, eyes closing briefly, letting the mind review and confirm decisions. You sense a quiet internal dialogue, a slow mental pacing that complements the physical rhythm of signing. The combination is oddly calming, a measured cadence that transforms the weight of authority into a steady, almost lulling pattern. By midday, most documents have been attended to. Lincoln sets down the final pen, adjusting his coat and taking a deep breath. The room filled with ink parchment, and the faint warmth of sunlight feels ordered, deliberate, and complete for the moment. You understand that the slow, patient rhythm of reading, evaluating, and signing is not merely clerical, it is the heartbeat of thoughtful governance, a gentle undercurrent sustaining the day. You trudge along with Lincoln as he leaves the study, the sunlight now casting a gentle warmth across the White House floors, and the soft hum of activity outside has begun to fade. It is time for another ritual reviewing correspondence from state governors and military commanders. These communications are weighty, formal, and often intricate, reflecting not only immediate concerns, but also the broader framework of policy law and wartime strategy. You sense the delicate balance in the room, the responsibility to act decisively, yet carefully, in a world filled with complex human needs. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln routinely reviewed communications from state leaders and generals, sometimes responding personally or dictating responses to secretaries maintaining oversight across political and military channels. Quirky tidbit: some letters included unusual requests, such as ceremonial recognition of local festivals or petitions to pardon animals involved in public service, and Lincoln reportedly read them with a blend of curiosity and gentle amusement. You can picture him holding a letter about a heroic goat and raising an eyebrow with a faint grin. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's thorough involvement in reviewing state communications strengthened federal oversight or slowed responsiveness. Some contend that it ensured thoughtful decisions and connected leadership. Others believe delegation could have streamlined administration. You watch as he opens the first envelope, a letter from a governor regarding troop allocations. Lincoln leans forward slightly, reading slowly, eyes tracing each line. He pauses, tapping his pen thoughtfully, then scribbles a note with measured care, approving certain allocations while requesting clarifications. The pace is deliberate, almost hypnotic, the mental process unfolding with quiet precision. The next letter involves a request for federal assistance in rebuilding infrastructure damaged by recent skirmishes. Lincoln reads carefully, noting logistics costs and potential political implications. His voice soft and steady murmurs key points as he considers trade-offs and options. The rhythm is slow but absorbing, and you find yourself drawn into the cadence, the gentle unfolding of deliberation. A light-hearted moment arises with a letter describing a local ceremony, celebrating a particularly clever barn design. Lincoln chuckles quietly, jotting a brief note. Ingenious architecture commendably executed. You smile at his understated humor, appreciating how levity threads subtly through even formal business. As more letters are reviewed, Lincoln consults maps, cross-references reports, and occasionally folds pages to return to later. Each communication demands attention, reflection, and judgment. You notice how the pace remains unhurried, the deliberate attention ensuring no detail escapes notice. The interplay between thought observation and written response becomes almost meditative. By late morning, the bulk of correspondence has been addressed. Lincoln leans back slightly, hands clasped, eyes briefly closing, as if allowing the weight of decisions to settle. The room feels calm, yet charged with quiet purpose, a balance of authority and careful attention. You realize that the rhythm of reviewing communications, slow and precise, is an essential part of sustaining leadership, a gentle but unbroken thread in the long tapestry of his day. Finally, he rises, adjusting his coat and straightening his posture. The letters have been read, responses noted, and decisions made with deliberation and care. You follow, absorbing the steady cadence, the measured attention, and the subtle interplay of duty reflection and gentle humor that defines this segment of his morning. You trudge alongside Lincoln as he walks toward the dining room, the late morning sun casting long, mellow shadows across the floors. The White House feels quieter now, a gentle lull after the intensity of correspondence and petitions. It is time for a brief midday respite, a simple meal that punctuates the morning's responsibilities and offers a moment of reflection. You notice the subtle shift in pace, the careful orchestration of nourishment, both physical and mental, before the afternoon duties begin. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln often ate modest meals during the day, sometimes alone, sometimes with close aides or family members. He was known for simple tastes, fruits, bread, and occasionally a hearty stew, and typically avoided elaborate dining during periods of intense work. Quirky tidbit. Lincoln reportedly had a fondness for apples and was known to enjoy them in various forms, fresh baked, or even incorporated into stews. You can imagine him slicing one, slowly savoring the crisp texture, and pausing briefly as he reflects on the morning's work. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's simple eating habits reflected frugality, practicality, or personal preference. Some suggest it allowed him to focus on leadership without distraction. Others note it may have also reflected the somber realities of wartime. You watch as he takes a small tray, selecting a modest portion of bread, some fruit, and a bowl of broth. The motions are deliberate, unhurried, a silent rhythm that contrasts with the previous intensity of decision-making. Each movement from pouring the broth to slicing the bread has a slow meditative cadence. You feel the atmosphere soften, a gentle lull enveloping the room. As Lincoln eats, he occasionally glances at a nearby note or document, reading briefly, then returning to his food. The pace is relaxed, allowing for thought to wander without urgency. You sense that even in these small moments, the rhythm of leadership continues quietly threading through mundane acts. A light chuckle escapes him as he recalls a humorous anecdote from a letter he read earlier, a small reminder that even during intense responsibility, Lincoln's sense of humor remained intact. You feel a gentle smile tug at your lips, the subtle humor threading like a soft whisper through the calm of the room. Another moment arrives when he pours a cup of water, slowly lifting it to sip. The clarity of the liquid, the simple act of nourishment seems symbolic, a grounding gesture amidst the complexity of governance. You notice how these minor routines punctuate his day, offering both pause and perspective. The meal continues in quiet, measured silence. Each bite, each sip is deliberate. You feel the gentle rhythm, the slow pacing, almost lulling you into the cadence of his day. Thoughts wander, reflection deepens, and the simple act of eating transforms into a meditative interlude. By mid-afternoon, the meal concludes. Lincoln wipes his hands, sets the tray aside, and stretches his long frame. The calm has provided a subtle reset, a gentle bridge between the morning's intensity and the tasks still ahead. You follow closely, absorbing the slow, intentional rhythm, the quiet reflection, and the faint undercurrent of humor that colors even these everyday moments. You trudge after Lincoln as he moves back to the study, the afternoon sun now casting a gentle golden haze across the White House rooms. The day stretches onward, yet a sense of rhythm has settled into the spaces. The deliberate pacing of letters, reports, petitions, meetings, and meals has created a slow, almost hypnotic cadence. Now comes the final segment of the formal workday, reviewing intelligence reports, monitoring troop movements, and planning strategic correspondence. The weight of responsibility hums quietly in the background, steady, but never oppressive. Mainstream historical fact: Lincoln was deeply involved in military strategy during the Civil War, often reviewing intelligence maps and reports, personally providing directives and guidance to generals and staff. Quirky tidbit. Occasionally, Lincoln would annotate maps with small sketches, sometimes humorous tiny soldiers marching miniature cannons drawn in the margins, as a method of visualizing troop movements or lightening the mental load. You can imagine his tall figure leaning over a large map quill in hand, with a small smirk forming as he doodles in the corner. Historians still argue whether Lincoln's hands-on approach to military oversight was essential for success or an inefficient allocation of his time. Some assert his personal involvement ensured coherent strategy. Others claim delegation might have allowed him to focus on broader political imperatives. You watch as he opens the first intelligence report, reading, slowly eyes scanning troop positions, supply lines, and potential vulnerabilities. He pauses, tapping the paper gently, then scribbles a note to a general suggesting an adjustment in deployment. The rhythm is meticulous. Read, reflect, annotate, repeat. Each step is deliberate, almost ritualistic. The next report concerns logistics for an upcoming campaign. Lincoln leans forward, studying the details carefully, occasionally consulting a small reference chart. You notice the unhurried precision in his movements, the thoughtful way he balances immediate tactical needs with long-term strategic goals. The slow pacing allows each decision to settle fully before the next is made. A brief moment of levity appears when he encounters a report including exaggerated claims of heroic feats by a regiment. Lincoln chuckles softly, writing a marginal note, courage perhaps enhanced by enthusiasm. You sense how humor continues to weave subtly through the day, softening the intensity without diminishing the gravity of responsibility. Another report details troop morale, including letters from soldiers describing conditions and personal reflections. Lincoln reads these slowly, sometimes murmuring observations under his breath, fingers lightly tracing key passages. You feel the weight of empathy in his actions, the blending of strategy and humanity that defines his leadership style. By late afternoon, the intelligence and military reports are mostly addressed. Lincoln leans back, hands resting on the desk eyes, briefly closing as if allowing the mind to consolidate decisions, observations, and reflections. The quiet rhythm of the day, letters, meetings, readings, meals, and strategic reviews has created a continuous thread of measured attention and calm diligence. Finally, he stands stretching his tall frame and surveys the room. Papers are organized, tasks addressed, and the gentle pulse of work begins to soften as evening approaches. You follow, silently absorbing the slow cadence of responsibility, reflection, and subtle humor, realizing that the day, though long and filled with duties, has unfolded with a deliberate grace that seems almost hypnotic in its steadiness. The day has gradually faded into the gentle embrace of early evening. You feel the slow exhalation of time, the soft unspooling of moments into a quiet rhythm. Shadows lengthen across the floor, the sunlight softens to a warm amber, and the weight of responsibility begins to dissolve into calm. Each task, each decision, each letter, and each moment of reflection now lingers like a gentle echo, a slow pulse that hums beneath the surface. You breathe with the rhythm, noticing the subtle shifts, the rustle of papers settling, the distant creak of floorboards, the faint warmth lingering in the room. Lincoln's day, meticulously paced, has carried a gentle cadence, a meditative unfolding of responsibility, thought, and subtle levity. You feel the same calm seep into your own awareness, a softening of tension and a slowing of perception. Even as the final tasks are done, you remain aware of the patterns, the deliberate attention, the gentle humor, the mindful consideration of human lives in both small and grand acts. The day has been long, yet each moment was measured, each action intentional, and each pause a space for reflection. You sense the delicate interweaving of duty, empathy, and calm discipline, a soothing rhythm that now carries you gently forward. The fading light casts a warm glow, inviting quiet contemplation. Your thoughts drift slowly, untethered, as if floating on a soft current. You carry the sense of patience, careful attention, and gentle humor that marked the day, allowing it to lull your mind and ease your senses. The world beyond continues, but for now, all is calm, steady, and softened by the slow cadence of a life meticulously observed. Take a deep breath, feel the quiet settling, and let the gentle rhythm of this day guide you toward restful calm. The long, deliberate pace reminds you that even amidst responsibility and complexity, there is room for patience, reflection, and subtle delight in the small details of life.